there are words that cannot be unsaid. Not because they are cruel. Exactly. Or not always. Sometimes the most irreversible words are spoken quietly, almost politely, in the ordinary light of an ordinary morning. With no raised voices and no slamming doors. They arrive in the room and change the air. And everyone present understands, in the moment of their speaking, that something has shifted that will not shift back. That the world before this sentence and the world after it are not quite the same world. The younger son's request was that kind of sentence. He did not shout it. He did not build to it over days of visible anger. Did not telegraph it with weeks of sulking or complaint. Or perhaps he did. Perhaps there had been a long season of restlessness before the words finally came. A gathering of something unnamed in his chest that everyone in the household had noticed, but no one had found the right way to address. We do not know. The story does not tell us what came before. It begins not with the particular economy of great storytelling at the moment of the words themselves. Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. 7 words in some translations, fewer in others. But whatever the count, the weight of them in the ancient world where this story was first told and first heard was immense. Far heavier than the same words would land in most modern ears. Because the culture in which this father and these sons lived had a very different relationship to inheritance, to family, to the meaning of property, and to the bond between a father and his children than most of us carry today. To understand what the younger son was really saying, you need to understand something about the world he was saying it in. In the ancient Near East, in the farming communities of first-century Palestine, where most of Jesus's listeners lived and worked and built their lives, a family's land was not merely an asset. It was identity. It was continuity. It was the physical substance of the covenant between generations. The tangible proof that your grandfather's labor and your father's labor and your own labor were all part of a single, unbroken story, stretching back further than memory could reach and forward further than any one life could see. You did not sell the family land. You did not divide it carelessly. You certainly did not take your portion and leave. Not while your father was still living. Not while the family still needed the full strength of its resources to survive the unpredictable rhythms of planting season and drought and the 1,000 small disasters that agricultural life was built around managing together. An inheritance came to a son when his father died. Not before. Asking for it before. Asking while the father was still alive. Still working. Still the living center of the household's world. Was not simply a financial request. In the cultural imagination of Jesus's audience, it carried an implication so stark and so painful that some of the rabbinical texts of that era address it directly. A son who asks for his inheritance while his father lives is, in effect, saying that he wishes his father were already dead. Not necessarily with malice, perhaps not even consciously, but the logic was inescapable in that world. And everyone in the story, the father, the elder brother, every neighbor who would eventually hear what had happened, would have understood it immediately. The younger son was saying, "I want what I would get if you were gone. I want to live as if you were already gone. I want my future without you in it." And the father divided his property between them. No argument recorded. No lecture delivered. No consequence imposed. No condition attached. No wounded silence stretched out to communicate the depth of what this request had cost him. The text moves with a quietness that is almost shocking. The son asked, and the father gave. Sit with that for a moment. Because the father in this story is not a weak man. He is not a man without feeling. Not a man to whom the request meant nothing. In the culture Jesus was speaking into, a man of this father's standing, a landowner, a patriarch, the head of a household with multiple servants, had real authority and real options. He could have refused. He could have rebuked his son publicly, could have made the cost of the request visible to everyone in the household, could have used the full weight of social and familial expectation to shut the conversation down before it went any further. He did none of those things. He simply gave. And in that giving, which looked from the outside like weakness or indulgence or perhaps a failure of proper parental firmness, there was something that the story will spend the rest of its length slowly revealing. The shape of a love that does not coerce. A love that holds its arms open rather than its fists closed. A love that understands, at some level deeper than strategy, that a person who is held by force is not truly held at all, and that the only way to keep someone who wants to leave is to let them go and trust that what you have given them will, in the end, be enough to bring them home. The father trusted something. The father believed something about his son that the son did not yet believe about himself. And so he divided his property, and he let the younger son go. Imagine the household in the days that followed the dividing. The elder brother, going about his work in the fields with the particular, careful silence of someone who has witnessed something he does not know how to process. The servants, moving through their tasks with the peripheral awareness of people who understand that something significant has happened in the family, but whose place is not to ask questions. The father, perhaps standing in the doorway in the evenings, watching the road that led away from the property toward the wider world, already beginning the long vigil that the story will later reveal he has been keeping. And the younger son, converting his share of the property into something portable. Land into currency. The patient accumulation of generations into coins that could be carried in a bag. The weight of his family's history into something light enough to travel with. There is a violence in that conversion that the story does not dwell on, but that any thoughtful reader can feel. The fields that had been plowed by his grandfather's hands. The trees that had been planted by people whose names he carried in his blood. All of it reduced to something he could put in a bag and walk away with. He gathered everything together. And not many days later, The text is precise about this unhurried speed, this absence of any further delay or second-guessing. He left. He took his journey into a far country. The phrase deserves a moment. A far country. In the geography of Jesus' parables, distance is never merely physical. The far country is not simply a place that required many days of travel to reach. It is the place of maximum distance from the Father. Distance measured not only in miles, but in the quality of the separation. The degree to which the life lived there would be lived entirely outside the Father's sight, outside his influence, outside the web of relationship and expectation and belonging that the family home represented. The younger son was not going on a journey. He was going into an entirely different way of being in the world. A way of being that had no father in it, no elder brother, no household, no fields that had been plowed by generations of people connected to him by blood and name. No one who knew who he was before he became whoever he was going to become out there. In the far country, with money in his bag and the whole wide world ahead of him, he was going to be free. Or so he believed. There is something recognizable in him, even now, across all these centuries. The hunger for a life that is entirely your own. The sense that the version of yourself that exists within your family, within your history, within the expectations of the people who have known you since before you had the language to define yourself. That version is somehow not the real you. That the real you is waiting somewhere else, in a life not yet lived, a self not yet discovered, a freedom not yet tasted. Most of us have felt some version of this. Not always dramatically. Not always in ways that lead us to cash in our inheritance and leave. But the pull, the quiet, persistent pull toward a life with more space in it, more autonomy, more room to be something other than what our history has made us. This is not a uniquely ancient feeling. It is not a feeling that belongs only to first-century Palestinian sons with complicated relationships to their fathers. It is a very human feeling, and the story of the younger son is not told in order to condemn it. The hunger for freedom is real. The desire to find out who you are when no one is watching, when no one's expectations are shaping the choices you make. This is not a small or stupid desire. It is part of what it means to be a person, to have a self that is genuinely yours, rather than simply a reflection of the world you were born into. The story is told to show us what the far country is actually like, and to show us what is waiting further down the road, when the far country has given us everything it has to give, and we finally turn, tired and empty, and carrying nothing but the memory of who we were before we left, and begin the long walk home. But that is for the chapters ahead. For now, let the morning settle. The morning the younger son walked away, the father watching from the gate. Perhaps the text does not say, but something in the story suggests he watched, that he stood there until the road curved, and the figure of his son grew small, and then disappeared, swallowed by the distance. That he did not stop watching. that he kept his eyes on that road, day after day, in the patient way of someone who expects, without any logical reason to expect it, that the figure will one day reappear, growing larger, coming home. Freedom has a particular feeling in the first days of it. A lightness, a spaciousness in the chest that you had forgotten was possible, or perhaps had never fully known before. The sense that the air itself is different here, less weighted, less watched, less full of the invisible pressure of other people's hopes and histories and quietly held expectations. You breathe differently in freedom's first days. Deeper, somehow, more fully, as if the lungs have been given room they did not previously know they were missing. The younger son would have felt this, walking away from the family property, the gate receding behind him, the familiar smell of the fields and the animals, and the particular dust of that particular road fading as he moved further into the world that had always existed beyond the edges of his known life. He would have felt the lightness, the opening, the extraordinary sensation of a future that had not yet been written by anyone, including himself. He had his money. He had his freedom. He had his whole life ahead of him, unencumbered by obligation or expectation or the weight of being someone's younger son. He had everything he had asked for. The far country welcomed him the way the far country always welcomes the young and the wealthy and the newly free, with open arms, with noise and light and the particular warmth of places that exist to offer people a good time, that have refined over generations the art of making a person feel, at least for the duration of an evening, that this is exactly where they were always meant to be. The far country was not a landscape of obvious danger or visible threat. It did not announce itself as a place of loss. It looked, in the beginning, very much like the life the younger son had been imagining in all those long evenings back home, when the family fields and the family routines and the family expectations felt like walls closing in. It looked like a rival. He spent his money freely. The text uses a phrase, loose living, in many translations. That carries the sense not necessarily of spectacular vice, but of a kind of careless extravagance. Money spent without thought, without plan, without the patient discipline of someone who understands that resources are finite and the future is long. Money spent the way money gets spent when a person is trying to buy something that money cannot actually purchase. The feeling of being fully alive, of mattering, of being seen and wanted and chosen, of belonging somewhere in a world that feels, beneath all its noise and color, increasingly large and indifferent. And the money bought those feelings. For a while, there is a particular social ecosystem that forms around young people with money in places far from home. Friends appear, or people who perform the function of friends with enough skill that the distinction is not immediately obvious. People who know the good places, the right people, who can smooth the path through an unfamiliar city and make a newcomer feel, almost overnight, like an insider. People whose warmth is genuine in the moment, whose laughter is real enough, who are actually enjoyable to be around, right up to the point where the money runs out. The younger son would have had these friends, would have sat at tables with them, eaten and drunk, told his story and heard theirs, felt the particular pleasure of being the one who could always pick up the bill, the one whose resources seemed limitless, the one people were always glad to see walk through the door. There is a real pleasure in that role, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. Being generous is genuinely enjoyable. Being wanted is genuinely enjoyable. The warmth of a crowded room where everyone is glad you are there. This is not nothing, but it is also not what the younger son actually needed. And somewhere, beneath the noise and the tables and the laughter and the comfortable feeling of being the one who always had enough, somewhere beneath all of it, something quieter and more persistent was running. A question that the noise was very good at drowning out, that the next evening's plans were very effective at postponing, that the next round of drinks could silence for another few hours, but never quite extinguish. Is this it? Not a dramatic question. Not a question that arrives with existential thunder and demands an immediate answer. Just a small, persistent, early morning kind of question. The kind that shows up in the hour before the noise starts again. When the room is quiet and the previous night's festivities have left their particular residue, and the day ahead stretches out without the shape that purpose and belonging give to days. Is this what I left for? Is this the life I converted the fields for? The life I walked away from the gate for? Is this freedom? And then the money ran out. The text handles this transition with a plainness that is almost gentle. He had spent everything. No drama. No single catastrophic decision. No villain who stole it. No disaster that arrived from outside. Simply the inevitable arithmetic of spending without replenishing, of drawing down a finite resource without any thought for the morning when the drawing would reach its end. He had spent everything, and almost simultaneously, with the timing that feels, in retrospect, almost too perfectly arranged to be coincidental, but that anyone who has ever been in genuine need will recognize as simply the way the world works. A severe famine arose in that country. The abundance dried up, not just for him, for the whole region. The markets thinned, the prices rose. The easy availability of everything that the fat years had made effortless suddenly contracted into scarcity. And the younger son, who had arrived with a bag full of the converted weight of his family's generations, found himself in a land of famine with nothing. He went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country. And the man sent him to his fields to feed pigs. In the world Jesus was speaking into, this detail would have landed with a particular weight for his Jewish listeners. Pigs were unclean animals in the Jewish tradition. Animals that a faithful Jewish person would not eat, would not handle, would not raise. To be reduced to feeding pigs was not merely a practical humiliation. It was a spiritual and cultural one as well. A symbol of how completely a person could travel from the center of everything they had been formed to be. Here was a son of a Jewish household, raised in the rhythms of a family that knew the traditions, that marked the seasons, that had its roots in something old and meaningful. Standing in a pig field in a foreign country, hungry enough to envy the carob pods he was throwing to the animals. No one gave him anything. That phrase, "no one gave him anything," lands quietly in the middle of the story. But it carries the full weight of the far country's final verdict. The friends were gone. The warmth was gone. The tables and the noise and the easy abundance were gone. The people who had been so glad to see him walk through the door when he had money in his bag had discovered, with the efficient practicality of people who had always known the difference between a guest and a friend, that they had somewhere else to be. He was alone, in a pig field, in a famine, with nothing. And this is the place where the story pauses, and where we need to pause with it. Because it would be easy. It would be very easy to read this section of the parable as a kind of moral accounting. The son made bad choices. The son suffered consequences. The consequences were proportionate to the choices. And here we are. Justice served. Lesson illustrated. But that reading misses something essential about how Jesus is telling this story, and about who he is telling it to. Jesus was not telling this parable to people who had never made bad choices. He was not performing a cautionary tale for the virtuous, demonstrating the fate of the reckless so that the careful could feel confirmed in their carefulness. He was telling it to people who already knew the pig field, who had already been in the place of having spent everything and found themselves in a famine with no one to give them anything. Tax collectors who had built their lives on a system that everyone knew was corrupt, and who were beginning to wonder, in the quiet moments, whether it was too late to become someone different. Sinners. The text uses that word without elaboration, letting it carry all the weight of people who had traveled their own versions of the far country and arrived at their own versions of the pig field. He was telling it to them. He was telling it to say, "I know where you are. I know what it looks like from inside that pig field. I know the particular quality of the hunger that is not just physical, the hunger that goes deeper than food, that is really a hunger for home, for belonging, for the restoration of something you did not fully understand you had until you no longer had it. And I want to tell you what is waiting at the end of the road back." The far country had given the younger son everything it had to give. The freedom, the tables, the noise, the temporary warmth of purchased companionship, the brief and brilliant feeling of being the one with resources in a world that rewarded resources. And it had taken everything he brought to it. He arrived full, and he was empty now. He arrived with a bag of coins that represented his family's history, and he had converted that history into an experience that was already fading from memory. that would leave no permanent mark on the world, that had purchased nothing that lasted. He stood in the pig field in the particular silence that descends when all the noise is finally gone. And there was nothing left to distract him from the truth that had been quietly waiting through all the weeks and months of spending and noise and temporary warmth. He thought of home, not abstractly, not as a concept or a symbol or a place of defeat. He thought of home the way hungry people think of food, specifically, physically, with the kind of memory that lives in the body rather than the mind. The smell of the fields in the morning, the sound of the household beginning its day, the particular quality of light in that part of the world at that particular time of year, the faces of the people who had known him before he was anyone except himself, his father's house, where even the hired servants had bread enough to spare. And he, the son, the heir, the one who had walked away with a bag full of his family's future, was perishing here with hunger. The far country was silent around him. The pigs moved in their slow, indifferent way through the field. The famine held the land in its dry, patient grip. The road that led back toward home stretched out in the imagination, long and difficult and requiring the crossing of every mile of distance he had put between himself and the gate he had walked away from. But it was there. The road was still there. And something in him, something that the far country had not managed to extinguish, something that had survived the spending and the famine and the pig field and the silence of the friends who were no longer anywhere to be found. Something in him knew the direction and was beginning, slowly and with great difficulty, and in full knowledge of everything it would cost, to turn. There is a moment before the moment of turning. A moment that does not look like anything from the outside. Nothing visible changes. The pig field is still the pig field. The famine is still the famine. The distance between where you are and where home is has not decreased by a single step. The circumstances are exactly what they were an hour ago, a day ago, a week ago. But something has shifted in the interior landscape. Something that had been facing one direction has, quietly and without ceremony, begun to face another. The text describes it with a phrase that has no real equivalent in modern English, because the experience it points to is one that our language tends to either dramatize or psychologize rather than simply name. He came to himself. Not, he had a breakthrough. Not, he hit rock bottom. Not, he experienced a transformative moment of clarity. Simply, he came to himself, as if the self he had been before the far country, the self that had been obscured by the noise and the spending and the accumulated distance from everything that had formed him, was still there all along, waiting with the patient reliability of something that cannot actually be left behind, no matter how far you travel. He came back to it, or it came back to him. Either way, something that had been lost, not in the far country, not in the pig field, but somewhere much closer to home. In the long, restless season before he ever asked his father for the inheritance, something came back. And in its coming back, everything looked different. What he saw, when he came to himself, was not complicated. He saw the truth. Not the truth as a grand revelation. Not the truth as a blinding spiritual experience that rearranged the furniture of his inner world in a single dramatic moment. Just the ordinary, unglamorous, entirely practical truth of his situation, seen clearly for perhaps the first time since he had walked away from his father's gate. How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? But I am dying here with hunger. This is the thought that comes to a person who has come to themselves. Not a theological insight, not a spiritual program, not a carefully constructed plan for self-improvement. Just the simple, clear-eyed recognition of a gap. The gap between what is and what could be, between where he was and where the road, if he had the courage to take it, might lead him. His father's hired servants had bread enough to spare. He was in a pig field, in a famine, with nothing. The contrast was not subtle. But the remarkable thing is not the contrast itself. It is that he was finally willing to see it. Because the contrast had been true for a while. The famine had been going on. The pig field had been his reality for longer than the moment of clarity in which he finally looked at it directly. The distance between his situation and the situation of the people back home eating his father's bread had been real and measurable long before the moment he chose to measure it. Sometimes the truth is not hidden. Sometimes the truth is simply the thing we have been standing next to, not quite looking at, for longer than we would like to admit. And then he did something that is, in its own quiet way, one of the most honest things a person can do. He made a plan. Not a grand plan. Not a plan full of ambition or self-justification or the desire to reclaim what he had lost. A small plan, carefully proportioned to the reality of his situation. A plan built not on the fantasy of restoration, but on the sober acknowledgement of what he had done and what he deserved. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired servants. He rehearsed it. This detail matters more than it might initially seem. He did not simply turn and start walking, propelled by emotion or desperation, or the kind of impulsive energy that had driven him in the other direction when he first asked for the inheritance. He sat with it. He thought it through. He said the words out loud. Perhaps, in the empty air of the pig field, testing them, feeling their weight, making sure they were true before he committed to saying them to the person they were intended for. I have sinned against heaven and before you. He was not constructing an excuse. He was not preparing a defense or an explanation or a narrative that would redistribute the responsibility for what had happened across a wider range of causes. He was preparing with the simple directness of a person who has come to themselves and can finally see clearly, to say the thing that was true. I did this. I was wrong. I am not what I was, and I have no claim on what I left. But here is where the rehearsed speech becomes one of the most revealing moments in the whole parable. He planned to ask his father to make him a hired servant. Not a son, a servant, a worker on the property, someone who would earn his keep by labor, who would occupy a defined and contracted role in the household, rather than the impossible, irretrievable role of beloved child. Someone who would have no claim on the father's heart, no expectation of the father's love, no presumption of welcome beyond what a fair employer might extend to a reliable worker. He had, in his clarity, recalibrated his expectations all the way down to what he believed the situation warranted. And what it warranted, he had concluded, was this: not sonship, not love, not the restoration of what had been broken, just the practical mercy of being allowed back inside the borders of a life that had bread in it. He would work for bread. That was all he was asking. That was all he felt he had the right to ask. And in this recalibration, which looks, on the surface, like humility and is genuinely humble in its way, there is also something else. Something that the parable is quietly, gently preparing to correct. He did not know his father. Not really. Not in the way that the rest of the story will reveal the father to be known. He knew the father of the first half of his life. The father he had taken for granted. The father whose love had been so steady and so constant and so simply there that he had never had to think about it. Never had to wonder what it was made of. Never had to test whether it would hold under the weight of the worst thing a son could do. He knew the father as background, as the permanent, unexamined fixture of a life he had been too young and too restless and too hungry for the far country to properly appreciate. He did not know the father as a person who would, when the moment came, do something that the son had not included in any version of his plan. He did not know, rehearsing his speech in the pig field, that the speech would never be finished, that the father would interrupt it. The road home was long. We do not know how many days it took. We do not know what he passed through. What villages, what landscapes, what weather, what encounters with strangers who may or may not have known him or his family, or the story of the son who had taken his inheritance and left. We do not know whether he walked quickly, propelled by the clarity that had come to him in the pig field, or slowly, weighed down by the knowledge of what awaited him at the gate, or rather, by what he assumed awaited him. What we know is what he carried. He carried hunger, the physical hunger of someone who had been in a famine, whose body had learned the lean discipline of having very little. He carried exhaustion, the exhaustion of work that had demanded everything and given almost nothing back. He carried the particular kind of fatigue that comes from living, for an extended period, as someone you are not. From performing a version of yourself shaped entirely by the far country, by its values and its rewards and its definitions of what a person is worth. And he carried shame. The shame was perhaps the heaviest thing. Heavier than the hunger, panned, heavier than the exhaustion, heavier than the physical distance still between him and the gate. Shame does not travel lightly. It does not cooperate with the pace you want to set. It slows everything down, turns the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other into something that requires constant renegotiation. Because every step toward home was a step toward the moment of having to look his father in the face. Every mile closed was a mile less between him and the eyes that had watched him walk away. The eyes of the man he had as good as told, "I wish you were dead. Give me what I would inherit if you were gone." The man who had, against all expectation, simply given it to him and let him go. What would those eyes hold when they saw him coming? Anger, perhaps. The legitimate, reasonable anger of a father who had been deeply wounded and who had had a long time to think about it. Disappointment. The quiet, erosive kind that does not shout but settles like dust over everything. A coldness that had not been there before, that had grown in the space left by the younger son's departure and the long silence that followed. Or perhaps, and this was the worst possibility of all, in some ways, perhaps simply nothing. Perhaps the father had done what people do when they have grieved a loss long enough, moved on, reorganized his world around the absence, built new routines and new expectations that did not include the younger son, arrived at a kind of peace that had no room in it for a return that came this late and this empty-handed. Perhaps the servant role was not even available. Perhaps there was no room at all. He kept walking anyway. Not because he was certain of his welcome. Not because the rehearsed speech felt adequate to what lay ahead. Not because the shame had lifted, or the hunger had eased, or the road had become any shorter. But because the pig field was behind him. And even an uncertain welcome was better than certain hunger. Even the possibility of a servant's place was better than the definite reality of the far country's famine. Even the risk of the father's eyes, whatever they held when they finally looked at him, was better than never finding out. He had come to himself, and the self he had come back to knew. In some place beneath the shame and the exhaustion and the carefully rehearsed speech, one thing that the far country had not managed to take from him. He had a father. Whatever else was uncertain, whatever the reception at the gate might hold, whatever the father's face might say when it finally turned toward him on the road, he had a father, and the road between them, however long, went in one direction: home. The evening light stretched long across the hills as he walked. The particular gold of late afternoon in that part of the world, warm and unhurried, The kind of light that makes even ordinary landscapes look like something worth looking at. The kind of light that falls the same way on the far country as it does on home. That does not distinguish between the ash heap and the feast. That simply arrives each evening and illuminates whatever is there to be illuminated. It fell on a young man on a road. Thin, tired, carrying nothing but the speech he had rehearsed and the self he had finally come back to. Walking toward a gate he was not sure would be open. Walking toward a father he was not sure he knew. Walking home. There is something the younger son did not know. Walking toward home on that long road. He did not know that he had been watched for. Not in the passive sense of someone whose absence has been noticed and whose return might, someday, be acknowledged. Watched for in the active sense, the daily, deliberate, never quite given up sense of a person who has positioned themselves in a place of visibility and kept their eyes on the road with the stubborn, illogical, utterly unstrategic persistence of someone who has decided, without evidence and without guarantee, that the person they are watching for is coming back. The father had been watching. We know this because of a single detail in the text that contains, within its few words, an entire portrait of a love that most of us have spent our lives underestimating. But while he was still a great way off, his father saw him. Still a great way off. Not at the gate. Not close enough for the features to be clearly distinguishable. Not close enough for the gait to be unmistakable. In the way that the gait of someone you love always becomes unmistakable. That particular way of moving through the world that belongs to one person and no other. Still far away. A figure on the road. Small with distance. Unremarkable to any eye that was not specifically daily. Longingly looking for exactly that figure. But the father's eye was that eye. The father had been looking at that road long enough, and with enough of the particular quality of attention that love generates, that he recognized his son at a distance that recognition should not have been possible. He saw him coming. And what happened next is one of the most extraordinary moments in all of the stories Jesus ever told. The father ran. 2 words. Unremarkable in isolation. In the way that the most important things are often unremarkable in isolation. But in the world Jesus was speaking into, those 2 words would have stopped every listener in their tracks. Because men of the Father standing did not run. This requires some explanation. Because the cultural weight of it is almost entirely invisible to modern readers and entirely obvious to the first century Palestinian audience who heard it. In the ancient Near East, and particularly in the village culture of first century Palestine, a man's dignity was a social reality with practical dimensions. It was expressed and maintained through comportment, through the pace and posture with which a man moved through his world, through the degree to which his physical presence communicated authority, gravity, the kind of unhurried self-possession that announced, this is a person of substance, a person whose time has value, A person who does not scramble. Running was undignified, not in a trivial, merely aesthetic sense. In a genuinely social sense, the sense that a man who ran in public had. By running, communicated something about his status, his composure, his relationship to the events around him that a man of standing was not supposed to communicate. Running was for children, for servants, for emergencies that demanded the setting aside of normal social performance. For a patriarch, a landowner, a man of the father's evident position in his community. Running was something you did not do. And this father ran, gathered his robes, the long outer garment that would have made running both awkward and visually conspicuous, that would have required being lifted and held to allow the legs to move freely. A gesture that would have been unmistakable to anyone watching from the village, and ran down the road toward his son. Think about who was watching. In the village culture of that world, almost everything happened in public. The road was not a private space. The gate of a family property was not a private space. The movements of a prominent man, and the father in this story is clearly a man of some prominence, with his servants and his hired workers and his fatted calf and his feasting, were the movements of a person whose community was always, in the ordinary way of close-knit villages, peripherally aware of what he was doing. Someone saw him run. Someone saw the robes lifted, the undignified pace, the direction toward that figure coming down the road. The figure that the village probably knew was the younger son, the one who had done that unthinkable thing and asked for his inheritance and gone. The one whose absence had been a fact of the community's life for however long he had been gone. Someone saw all of this. And in running, in choosing, at the moment of his son's return, to set aside every consideration of dignity and status, and the opinion of the watching village. The father was making a statement that went far beyond the physical act of running. He was saying, there is nothing, no social cost, no dignity worth preserving, no audience whose opinion matters more than this, that would make me walk slowly toward my son right now. He was saying, whatever he did, whatever he cost me, whatever the village thinks of what I am about to do, he is mine, and I am going to him. He fell on his neck and kissed him. The Greek word used for the kiss carries the sense of kissing repeatedly, warmly, the kind of greeting that is not a polite social gesture, but a full-bodied expression of love that has been held in storage for a long time and is now, finally, released. This was not a careful, measured welcome. This was a man who had been watching the road for his son and had finally, after however many days and weeks and months of watching, seen him coming, and had run to him and held him and kissed him before the son could get a single word of his carefully rehearsed speech out. And the son began his speech. Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. he got that far. He did not get to the part about the hired servants, because the father was already talking to someone else. Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him. The best robe. Not a robe. Not a serviceable garment adequate to the practical need of covering a person who had arrived in whatever condition the far country and the road had left him in. The best robe. The one reserved for the most honored guest. The most significant occasion. The kind of moment that warranted the finest thing the household had to offer. On him. On this person who had arrived smelling of pig fields and famine and the far country. Who had come expecting to negotiate for a servant's position. Who had prepared himself for the possibility of being turned away entirely. On him, the best robe, placed on his shoulders before the dust of the road had been washed from his feet, and put a ring on his hand. The ring. In the ancient world, a ring was not merely jewelry. A family ring, a signet ring. The kind that a patriarch might use to seal documents, to authenticate transactions, to put the weight of the family's name behind a decision, was an instrument of authority and belonging. To put the ring on the returning son's hand was to restore, in a single gesture, something that the son had not dared to ask for. Not a servant's position, not a worker's wage. Sonship, authority, the right to act in the family's name, and shoes on his feet. Shoes. In a household with servants, the servants did not necessarily wear shoes. Bare feet were, in many contexts, a marker of servant status. Shoes were what free people wore. Shoes were what sons wore. To put shoes on the returning son's feet was to say, in the physical language of the culture, with complete clarity, he is not a servant here. He is not an employee. He is not someone whose place in this household is contingent on his usefulness or his past behavior, or his ability to make up for what he took when he left. He is a son. He has always been a son. He will always be a son. And bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. The fatted calf was not an everyday resource. In the agricultural world of first century Palestine, an animal kept specifically for feasting, fed and maintained and set aside for the right occasion, represented a significant investment, a commitment of resources held in reserve for a moment, worth the expenditure. You did not kill the fatted calf for an ordinary day. You killed it for a wedding, for a festival, for the kind of celebration that the whole community would know about and remember. The father killed it for a Tuesday when a young man came down the road who had spent his inheritance and worked in a pig field and arrived with nothing but a rehearsed speech about not deserving to be called a son. He killed the fatted calf for that. And then the father said something that deserves to be read slowly and held carefully and not rushed past in the eagerness to get to the next part of the story. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. My son? Not my foolish son. Not the one who squandered everything. Not the one I will cautiously welcome back on a probationary basis while we see whether he has genuinely changed and whether he can be trusted this time. Not even the one who came to his senses and made a reasonable decision to return. My son, the identity has not changed. The relationship has not been renegotiated. The love that was present before the inheritance was asked for, before the gate was walked away from, before the far country and the pig field and the famine, that love has simply been waiting in the open-handed, watching, road-scanning way of a love that does not know how to be anything other than what it is. For the person it belongs to come home, was dead, is alive again, was lost, is found. The Father does not say, was wrong and is now right, was bad and is now better, was a disappointment and is now redeemed. He says, was dead and is alive, was lost and is found. The language is not the language of moral evaluation. It is the language of existence itself, of presence and absence, of being here and not being here, of the particular grief of loving someone who is gone, and the particular, irreplaceable joy of having them back. And they began to celebrate. Music, dancing, the household full of the sounds that a household makes when something worth celebrating has happened. Something so genuinely good that the celebration is not a performance, but a natural overflow of the reality. The fatted calf on the fire, the best robe on the son's shoulders, the ring on his hand, the shoes on his feet, and the father, who had run down the road and interrupted the rehearsed speech and started talking to the servants before the son had finished asking to be made one. The father at the center of it all, celebrating. The son had come back expecting to ask for a servant's wage. He had received a party. He had come back prepared to enumerate his failures and negotiate for the smallest possible mercy. He had received the best robe and the fatted calf and his father's arms around him before he finished his first sentence. He had come back not knowing whether the gate would be open. He had been met, while still a great way off, by a man who had been watching the road for him, running. There is a reason this parable has traveled across 2,000 years and shows no signs of losing its power. It is not because it is a story about what a son should do when he has made terrible choices. It is not primarily a story about repentance, though repentance is in it. It is not a moral lesson about the consequences of squandering your inheritance. It is a story about what the Father does. It is a story about a love that watches the road, that runs, that interrupts the prepared speech of self-condemnation before it can reach its conclusion. That does not wait for the full accounting of failures before deciding on the response. That reaches for the best robe before the dust is off the traveler's feet. It is a story about a love that was there before the leaving, and was there during the leaving, and was there watching the road during every day of the far country, and was there running down the road at the first sight of a figure, still a great way off. A love that does not need you to arrive cleaned up and adequately sorry and fully reformed before it decides to be what it has always been. A love that meets you on the road, while you are still a great way off. With the best robe already in its arms. The music had been going on for a while before he heard it. That detail matters. The elder brother was not present when the father ran down the road. He was not there for the embrace. Did not see the robe being placed on his brother's shoulders or the ring slipped onto his brother's hand. He did not witness the moment the fatted calf was called for. Did not hear the father's voice saying, "My son was dead and is alive again." He was where he had been every day, doing what he had always done, faithful and present, and working in the way that he had been working since before the younger son ever asked for his inheritance and left. He was in the field, and when his day's work was done and he came in toward the house, he heard something that did not belong to an ordinary evening. Music. Dancing. The sounds of a celebration in full swing. Not the quiet domesticity of a normal household evening, but something larger, louder, more festive than the house had been in a long time. He called one of the servants and asked what was happening. And the servant told him, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he has received him back safe and sound." The elder brother's response is one of the most honest moments in any parable Jesus ever told. He was angry, and he refused to go in. The text is direct about both things, and the directness is important. This is not a story that handles the elder brother gently, softening his reaction or quickly moving past it to more comfortable territory. His anger is named. His refusal is named. And they are named because they are real. And because Jesus, who was a more careful and more honest storyteller than he is often given credit for, understood that the elder brother's anger was not simply a character flaw to be noted and dismissed. It was something that needed to be heard. Think about who the elder brother was. He was the one who stayed. While his younger brother was converting the family land into portable currency and heading for the far country, the elder brother was here, waking up every morning to the same fields, the same work, the same responsibilities that the family's survival depended on. Managing the property that had not been divided. His own inheritance still tied up in the land. Still at the mercy of weather and market and the thousand contingencies of agricultural life in a subsistence economy. Supervising the servants. Making the decisions. Carrying the weight of a household that had been halved by the departure of both the younger son and his share of the resources. He had watched his father walk around with the particular quietness of a man who is grieving. Had seen him pause at the gate in the evenings and look down the road. Had perhaps felt, in those moments, the particular loneliness of being the present child in the shadow of the absent one. The one who is here, who is always here, whose presence is perhaps taken for granted precisely because it is constant and reliable. and unspectacular. He had never left. He had never asked for anything. He had never caused his father a single day of the kind of pain that the younger son's departure had caused. And now the younger son was back. And there was music. And there was dancing. And there was a fatted calf on the fire. The fatted calf that the elder brother had watched being fed and maintained, that he had perhaps thought of, in the abstract way of a working farmer, as a resource to be used someday for something worth using it for. And it had been used for this. His father came out to him. Again, as with the younger son, the father is the one who moves toward. The father does not wait inside the celebration for the elder brother to compose himself and come in when he is ready. He comes out. He finds his son standing in the gathering dark outside the house where the music is playing, and he entreats him. The word the text uses for what the father does is important. He did not instruct. He did not command. He entreated. He appealed. He asked. He made a request of his elder son that acknowledged, in the very form of its asking, that the son had the right to refuse. And the elder brother spoke. Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. Every sentence in this speech is true. That is the first thing to say about it. The elder brother is not lying. He is not exaggerating wildly or constructing a distorted narrative out of wounded pride. He has served his father for many years. He has not disobeyed. A young goat, a far more modest resource than a fatted calf, had apparently never been offered for a celebration with his friends. And his brother had indeed devoured the property and returned with nothing. All of it true. And yet, something in the speech is also not wrong exactly, but incomplete. Missing something. Seeing clearly in some directions and not seeing at all in others. He called the younger son, this son of yours. Not my brother, not even the younger son. This son of yours. In those 3 words, the elder brother is doing something that people in pain often do. He is severing the relationship, refusing the connection, drawing a line between himself and the person whose return has cost him something. It is an understandable response. It is also a revealing one, because in calling his brother this son of yours, the elder brother is revealing the architecture of how he has been experiencing the family he has lived in all his life. There is the father. There is this other person who is apparently the father's son. And there is the elder brother, performing his service, keeping his record clean, earning his place through years of faithful, unrewarded labor. Not a family, a transaction, not a relationship, an employment arrangement with better than average job security. This is where the parable becomes uncomfortable in a different way than the younger son's story was uncomfortable. Because the younger son's lostness was visible. It had an address, the far country, the pig field, the spending and the famine and the ending up with nothing. It was the kind of lostness that announces itself, that wears its own consequences visibly, that eventually produces the hunger and the clarity that sent him back down the road. The elder brother's lostness is harder to see. He has been here the whole time. He has done everything right, by every external measure. Obedience, faithfulness, presence, service. He has been the good son, the reliable son, the son whose behavior has never given his father a sleepless night or a tear-stained evening at the gate. And yet, he is standing outside the party, in the dark, refusing to go in. And in that refusal, in the anger and the grievance and the "this son of yours," we can see the outline of a lostness that has no pig field and no famine, that has stayed within the borders of the family property and kept all the rules and maintained all the appearances, and has nevertheless managed, over the years, to drift somewhere that looks very much like the far country of the heart. The elder brother had been working for his father. He had not been living with his father. This is the distinction that Jesus' original audience, the Pharisees and scribes who had gathered, disapprovingly, to watch him eat with tax collectors and sinners, would have felt land with particular precision, because they were the elder brothers, faithful in their observance, careful in their conduct, present, always present, in the house and the temple and the synagogue, doing the work, keeping the commandments, maintaining the record that entitled them. They believed to a standing that the returning, repentant, undeserving younger brother had no business claiming. And they were angry. Angry that Jesus welcomed the wrong people. Angry that the father in the story ran down the road for the son who had squandered everything, while the son who had stayed and served received no fatted calf. Angry. At some level they might not have been able to fully articulate, to wiling, because the story Jesus was telling made the elder brother look not like the hero, but like someone who had fundamentally misunderstood what the family was, what the relationship was, what the father was actually like. Because here is what the elder brother did not know. In all his years of faithful service, he did not know that he could have had a young goat any time he asked. The father says it plainly, gently, without accusation. Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. All that is mine is yours. The resources the elder brother was keeping such careful track of. The goat for a party, the calf for a celebration, the reward that faithful service deserved but had apparently never received, were not being withheld. They were available. They had always been available. All that the father had was already the elder son's, had been his all along. But he never asked. He never asked because somewhere in the architecture of how he understood his relationship with his father, Asking felt inappropriate. Asking felt like it would disrupt the transaction. The careful economy of service rendered and reward eventually received. The ledger he had been keeping in his heart through all the years of working in the field. To ask would be to admit that he wanted something, needed something, that the relationship was not simply a matter of output and fairness and keeping his side of the bargain in good order. To ask would be to be a son rather than a servant. And he had, without quite knowing when it happened or how, forgotten how to be a son. There is a kind of faith that looks exactly like the elder brother's life. It shows up. It does the work. It keeps the commandments, attends the services, maintains the appearances, produces nothing that can be pointed to as failure. From the outside, it looks like exactly what faithfulness is supposed to look like. But inside, in the part of the life that does not show up in the attendance record or the tithing envelope or the years of unbroken service, something has quietly shifted. The relationship has become a job. The father has become an employer. The faith has become a performance maintained for an audience that includes, somewhere near the center, the self that needs to believe it has earned its place, needs to know the ledger is favorable, needs to be certain that the standing it occupies was achieved rather than given. And when grace shows up, when the Father runs down the road for someone who did not earn it, when the robe is given to the person who deserved the pig field, when the fatted calf is killed for the return of someone whose return cost everyone something, this kind of faith does not celebrate. This kind of faith stands outside in the dark and calls the brother this son of yours. The father's response to the elder brother is one of the most tender things in the entire parable. He did not argue with him, did not defend the decision to celebrate or recite the arithmetic of fairness, to demonstrate that the elder brother's grievance was misplaced, did not minimize what the elder brother had given, or suggest that his years of faithfulness had gone unnoticed. He called him son. Son, you are always with me. Not a rebuke, a reminder, a gentle, persistent, entirely undeserved reminder of the thing the elder brother had lost sight of in all his years of service and scorekeeping. You are always with me. The presence, the daily, unbroken, taken for granted presence in the Father's house was not the compensation for a relationship. It was the relationship. The elder brother had been living in the closest possible proximity to everything he was standing outside in the dark, longing for, and had not known it, because he had been so busy keeping the record of what he deserved that he had never once simply rested in the fact of being here, being loved, being the Father's son. Not because he earned it, because he was. The music continued inside. The fatted calf was on the table. The younger son, robe on his shoulders, ring on his hand, shoes on his feet, was somewhere in the celebration, beginning the long process of learning to inhabit, again, the identity he had walked away from. And outside, in the evening air, the father stood with his elder son, entreating him, waiting, holding the door open. The parable ends before the elder brother decides. This is not an accident. Jesus was too careful a storyteller, too precise in his understanding of how stories work and what they are for, to have left the ending open by oversight. He knew exactly where he was stopping. He knew that the question, "Will the elder brother go in?" was a question he was not going to answer. And in not answering it, he was doing something that the greatest stories do. He was turning the unfinished ending toward the listener and making it, quietly and unmistakably, their question to answer. Not about a character in a parable, about themselves. But before we arrive at that open door, there is something in this chapter that deserves its own careful attention. Something that is easy to pass over in the drama of the elder brother's anger and the father's tender response. Something that sits quietly in the structure of the story and rewards the reader who pauses to notice it. The father went out twice. Once for the younger son, running down the road, robes lifted, dignity set aside. The watching village be what it may, running toward the figure still a great way off, with the best robe already waiting and the fatted calf already as good as called for. And once for the elder son, standing in the dark outside the party, rigid with anger and grievance and the accumulated weight of years of faithful service that had felt in the moment of the younger brother's return, suddenly and retroactively unrewarded. Standing there in the place where the music from inside could be heard but not entered, where the celebration was real and visible and completely inaccessible, not because the door was locked, but because something in him could not yet cross the threshold. And the Father came out to him there. Same Father, same love, same going out. The form of it different. No running this time. No dramatic convergence on a road. Car. No robe and ring and shoes and fatted calf, already set in motion before the conversation even begins. But the same essential movement, the Father moving toward the Son, not waiting for the Son to compose himself and come in on his own terms. Going out, finding him where he is, standing with him in the dark. This symmetry is the parable's quiet architecture, and it is worth sitting inside for a moment. Because the two sons in the story represent two very different ways of being lost, and two very different kinds of people in Jesus' original audience, and two very different experiences that most of us have had at some point in our own lives of faith. And in both cases, the Father's response is the same. He goes out. He does not wait inside. Surrounded by the warmth and noise of the celebration, for both his sons to find their way in on their own schedule and in their own time. He does not post a servant at the door with instructions to relay his availability. He does not manage the situation from a distance, sending word that he is open to reconciliation when the appropriate conditions are met. He goes out to the one on the road, still carrying the smell of the pig field, to the one in the dark, still carrying the weight of every year of unrewarded service, to both, without waiting to be asked. There is a theological idea embedded in this double going out that is older than the parable itself, that runs through the entirety of the scriptures. Jesus grew up reading and knowing by heart. The God of the Hebrew Bible is, again and again, a God who goes out, who walks in the garden in the cool of the day, looking for the people who are hiding, who calls to a man named Abram and tells him to leave his country and his kindred and his father's house and go to a land that will be shown to him, and then goes ahead of him into the unknown to show it, who appears to a fugitive named Moses in a burning bush on the backside of the desert and says, "I have seen the affliction of my people. I have heard their cry. I know their sufferings. And I have come down. I have come down. Not, I am available, should they choose to seek me. Not, I have established the proper procedures for approach, and those who follow them may find me. I have come down." The movement is always in the deepest current of the biblical story, from the divine toward the human. The going out is not the exception. It is the character. And Jesus, in telling this parable, is doing what he always does when he tells parables. He is showing his listeners the face of the God they thought they already knew, and revealing that the face is more extraordinary than they had understood. The father in the story is not a portrait of ideal human fatherhood. He is a portrait of the divine. And the divine, this portrait says, is the God who goes out twice, who does not reserve the going out for the dramatically lost, for the ones in the pig field, the ones with the obvious and visible failures, but who also goes out for the quietly lost, for the ones who have been in the house all along, doing the work, keeping the record, gradually and without quite noticing it, drifting from relationship into transaction. For the ones who are standing in the dark, outside the party, angry and alone, one step away from everything they have been working toward, without knowing they were working toward it. One step, and the Father comes out to them there. What does the Father say? Standing in the dark with his elder son? He does not argue the case for the celebration. He does not present a defense of his decision to run down the road and kill the fatted calf. He does not compare the two sons, does not suggest that the elder brother's years of faithful service are less valuable than the younger son's dramatic return. He simply says what is true. Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. And then, it was fitting to celebrate and be glad. For this your brother was dead, and is alive. He was lost, and is found. Notice the word he uses. Your brother. Not this son of mine. Not the one who came back. Not even the younger son, the errant son, the one who caused all this trouble. Your brother. The father refuses the severance. The elder son had said, "This son of yours," a phrase that drew a line, created a distance, denied the connection. And the father, gently and without making it a confrontation, restores it. Your brother. He is yours. He belongs to you. The family is not a transaction with the father at the center distributing resources to individual sons based on merit. It is a family, a web of belonging that includes both of these sons, that is diminished when either of them is lost, and that is complete only when both of them are in. Your brother was dead and is alive, and the father is asking the elder son, with the same openness with which he entreated him, to let that be enough, to let the aliveness of his brother be a cause for gladness rather than a cause for grievance, to step out of the ledger keeping and the score settling and the long accumulation of resentments, legitimate resentments, real resentments, resentments that a fair accounting might well validate, and into something larger, into the party, into the room where the music is, into the place where a brother who was dead is alive and a family that was broken is, against all reasonable expectation, whole. And then the story ends. The doors open. The father is standing in the dark with his elder son, having said what he had to say, having offered what he had to offer, the same thing he always offers, K. The thing he offered the younger son on the road and offers the elder son in the dark, his presence, his love, the gentle and insistent reminder that the relationship is real and the belonging is unconditional and the door is open. He has gone out twice. He cannot go in for his son. That step, the step from the dark into the light, from the outside of the party to the inside, from the place of grievance to the place of grace. That step belongs to the elder brother. It is his to take or not to take. The father will not take it for him. The parable will not take it for him. Jesus will not take it for him. The question is left hanging in the evening air. Will he go in? And here is where the parable turns, quietly and completely, toward whoever is reading it now. Because Jesus told this story to specific people, the Pharisees and scribes grumbling at the edges of the crowd, the tax collectors and sinners sitting at his table. But he did not tell it only to them. He told it to everyone who would ever hear it, across every generation. In every language it has been translated into, in every circumstance of every life that has ever carried it forward. And the question the open ending asks is not about a character in a parable. It is asking, which son are you? Or perhaps more accurately, which son are you today? Because the remarkable and humbling thing about this parable is that most of us have been both. Most of us have had our seasons in the far country. Seasons when we wanted the inheritance without the relationship. the blessings without the giver, the freedom of a life lived entirely on our own terms, in a place far enough from home that no one knew our name or our history or the gate we had walked away from. Seasons when we spent what we had been given on things that could not hold us and arrived, eventually, in our own version of the pig field, empty, in a way that had nothing to do with the famine and everything to do with the distance we had put between ourselves and the place we came from. And most of us have also had our seasons as the elder brother. Seasons of faithful, unrewarded service that gradually, imperceptibly, shifted from love into duty, from relationship into obligation, from being a son into performing the role of a son for an audience that included, most prominently, ourselves. Seasons when we stood at the edges of the grace that was being freely offered to other people and felt, in the privacy of our own hearts, the anger that grace produces in the person who has been keeping score. Seasons when we called the people God was running toward this son of yours, distancing, categorizing, drawing the lines that allowed us to feel justified in our position outside the party. The parable asks, "Will you go in?" Not as an accusation, as an invitation. The door is open. The music is real. The celebration inside is not a performance. It is the genuine, overflowing joy of a father whose child was dead and is alive, whose family was broken and is being made whole, whose love has been vindicated in the most personal and irreducible way. The person it was given to has come home. The door is open, and the Father is standing in the dark with you, asking you to come in, not because you have resolved all your grievances, not because the ledger has been balanced to your satisfaction, not because the younger brother has adequately acknowledged what his leaving cost you, not because the situation has been made fair in all the ways it was not fair, but because your brother was dead and is alive, and because you are always with the Father, and because all that the Father has is already yours, and because the party, the real party, the one that has been waiting since before you knew you were invited, is on the other side of a door that is standing open. And the Father is right here, in the dark, waiting to walk in with you. The evening deepened over the village. Inside the house, the music continued. The celebration had the quality of something that did not quite know when to stop. Not from excess, but from genuine fullness. From the kind of joy that is not performed for an audience, but simply is. The way the light from the fire simply is. The way the warmth in the room simply is. Filling the available space without effort or intention. Outside, two figures stood in the gathering dark. A father and a son. The door between them and the light was open. The distance was one step. What happened next? The parable does not say. What happens next is yours to answer. There is a word that carries more weight than almost any other word in any language. Not because it is complicated, not because it requires years of study to understand, or a theology degree to properly define, or a lifetime of scholarship to unpack. It is, in most languages, a short word. A word that children learn early, that shows up in the first sentences most of us ever spoke, that sits in the vocabulary long before we have any framework for understanding what it actually means. Home. We use it casually, constantly, in ways that barely graze its depth. We say we are going home when we mean we are going to the building where our furniture is. We say someone feels like home when we mean they are comfortable and familiar. We say we want to go home when we are tired, when we are overwhelmed, when the world has been too much for too long, and we need to be somewhere that does not require us to perform or explain or maintain the version of ourselves we present to everyone else. But underneath all those casual uses, the word carries something heavier and more serious. Something that the parable of the prodigal son has been across its entire length, quietly excavating. Home is not a place. Home is a relationship. The younger son discovered this in the pig field. He was not homesick for a building. He was not homesick for the specific quality of light in the eastern fields at sunset, or for the smell of the household's morning bread, or for the particular sounds of that specific property waking up to another day. All of those things were part of it, carried in the body's memory, the way sensory details always are, surfacing unbidden in the quiet moments. But what he was actually homesick for was his father. The relationship, the belonging, the sense of being known, really known, in the way that only people who have watched you grow from infancy have ever known you, and still wanted. The security of existing within a love that did not need to be earned and could not be lost by behavior, that had been there before he was old enough to do anything to deserve it and would. He was beginning to hope against the evidence of his own choices, still be there when he arrived back at the gate with nothing. Home was his father's face, and the father's face, it turned out, was the thing that had been watching the road for him all along. The elder brother discovered something different and harder in the dark outside the party. He had been home, physically, geographically, practically home, the entire time his brother was gone. He had slept in the same house, worked the same fields, eaten at the same table, been in the daily proximity of the same father whose love the younger son had been surviving on the memory of from thousands of miles away. And he had been lonely. Not lonely in the obvious way, not without company or conversation, or the ordinary human warmth of a household going about its life, but lonely in the deeper sense, the loneliness of a person who is physically present in a relationship, but not fully inhabiting it, who has been going through the motions of belonging without allowing themselves to actually belong, who has been so busy managing the transaction, the service rendered, the obedience maintained, the record kept, that they have never simply rested in the fact of being loved. He had been home without knowing he was home. And standing in the dark, hearing his father say, "You are always with me, and all that is mine is yours," he was being offered, perhaps for the first time with this kind of clarity, the chance to understand what home actually was. Not the fields, not the inheritance, not the years of faithful service or the unbroken record of obedience. The Father, always the Father. And so what does this ancient story, told by a rabbi in first-century Palestine to a crowd that included tax collectors and Pharisees and fishermen and everyone in between, have to say to the person who is lying awake in the dark tonight? What does it have to say to the person who has spent time in their own version of the far country? Not necessarily the dramatic version, not necessarily the version with a pig field and a famine and a rehearsed speech practiced in the empty air, but the version that looks like years of drifting, of prioritizing things that seemed important and turned out to be less important than they appeared, of waking up one ordinary morning and realizing that the distance between where you are and where you want to be is larger than you noticed it becoming. What does it say to the person who has been the elder brother? Faithful, present, doing all the right things, keeping all the right accounts, and finding, in the quiet of an honest moment, that the faithfulness has become hollow somewhere along the way, that the right things have been done for the wrong reasons, that the account keeping has replaced the relationship it was supposed to be an expression of. What does it say to the person who is not sure which son they are? Because they have been both. Sometimes in the same week, sometimes in the same day. It says, the Father is watching the road. It says, the Father has gone out twice and will go out as many times as is needed, and does not require you to clean yourself up before he runs to meet you. It says, the door is open. It says, home is not a condition you achieve. It is a relationship you return to. And the returning does not require you to be further along in your transformation than you actually are. Does not require the speech to be fully prepared, or the shame to be fully processed, or the elder brother's grievances to be fully resolved. It requires only the turning. The decision to face the direction of home and begin, however slowly and however imperfectly, to walk. There is something else this story says that is easy to miss in the drama of the running father and the returning son and the angry elder brother standing in the dark. It says, you are not the only character in your story. The younger son spent his time in the far country living as if he were the only person in his own story, making choices without accounting for their weight on the people left behind, converting the family's history into portable currency and walking away from everyone who had ever loved him, toward a freedom that turned out to be loneliness with better scenery. He lived in the far country, as if the father had stopped existing when the gate closed behind him. The father had not stopped existing. The father had been at the gate. This is the correction that the parable offers to the younger son's version of the story. You were never, not for a single day, out of the Father's sight or out of the Father's love. The far country was not beyond the reach of the love that had formed you. The pig field was not outside the awareness of the one who had watched you walk away. every day of the famine, every carob pod thrown to the unclean animals. Every morning you woke up in the far country with less than you had the morning before. The Father was at the gate, watching. And when you turned, when the moment came that you came to yourself, and the road home became a possibility rather than an impossibility, the Father saw you coming while you were still a great way off. You were never as lost as you felt. You were always as loved as you were before you left. And to the elder brother, to the person who has been faithful and present and quietly accumulating the weight of unrewarded service, who has found themselves standing in the dark outside a grace they cannot quite enter, the parable says something equally important. You have been home the whole time. The thing you have been working so hard to earn has been yours all along. The belonging you have been performing for has never been contingent on your performance. The love you have been trying to merit through years of unbroken obedience has never required meriting. Not because it is cheap, but because it was given before you ever did anything to deserve it. And it will still be there when the ledger is finally, exhaustedly, set down. You do not have to keep score. You are allowed to ask for the goat. You are allowed to celebrate your brother's return. Not because the return was fair, not because the fatted calf was proportionate to what the departure cost, but because your brother was dead and is alive, was lost and is found. And that is, in the economy of the Father's love, exactly the kind of thing that warrants a party. You are allowed to go in. The door is open. The music is real. And the Father, who has been standing in the dark with you, is ready to walk in with you whenever you are ready. Home, in the end, is this. Not the building, not the inheritance, not the record of faithful service or the drama of the returned prodigal. Not the fatted calf, or the best robe, or the ring, or the shoes. Not even the party itself, wonderful as the party is. Home is the Father saying, "My son, when you were prepared to be called a servant." Home is the Father saying, "You are always with me," when you had forgotten what always meant. Home is being known completely, historically, with full knowledge of the pig field and the far country and the scorekeeping and the anger, and being loved anyway. Not loved despite those things, as if the love were heroically overcoming an obstacle, but loved through them and in them, and on the other side of them, with a love so fundamental to who the Father is that it does not require your worthiness in order to exist. Home is the Father on the road. Home is the Father in the dark. Home is the door that is always open, and the light that is always on, and the best robe that is always already being brought, and the celebration that is always being prepared for the moment you decide to turn from wherever the far country has taken you and begin the long walk back. The music in the parable does not stop. Jesus ends the story in the middle of the celebration, with the party still going and the Father still outside, with the elder son and the door still open and the question still unanswered. The story does not resolve into a tidy conclusion because the story is not finished. it is still being told. It is being told in every life that carries any version of the younger son's restlessness or the elder brother's grievance. In every heart that has spent time in the far country or the dark outside the party. In every person who has ever stood at the edge of an undeserved grace and had to decide whether to step into it. The Father is still running down roads. The Father is still going out into the dark to find the sons who are standing outside the celebrations they cannot quite bring themselves to enter. The door is still open. The music is still playing. And somewhere in the story, somewhere in the part that comes after the parable ends, the part that is yours to write, someone is making their way toward the gate. Thin from the famine, tired from the road, carrying nothing but the rehearsed speech of all their failures and a memory, faint but persistent, of what home smelled like before they left. And the Father is already running, has already seen them coming from a great way off, is already reaching for the best robe, is already calling for the celebration to begin. Tonight, wherever you are, whatever road you are on, whatever distance lies between you and the gate, whatever version of the far country or the dark outside the party you are standing in, let yourself be found, not when you are ready, not when the speech is adequately prepared or the shame is adequately processed or you have traveled far enough back toward home to feel like the welcome is something you could receive without embarrassment. Now, here, wherever here is, the Father is not waiting for you to arrive. The Father is already on the road, already running, already calling out to the household to get the best robe ready. Let yourself be seen coming. Let yourself be run toward. Let the speech be interrupted by an embrace before it reaches its conclusion. Let the robe be placed on your shoulders before you have finished listing why you do not deserve it. Let the door be open. Let the music in. Come home. The road has always led here. The Father has always been watching. The door has always been open. And the music, the real music, the music that was written before you left and kept playing while you were gone, and never, not for a single day, stopped, has always been playing for you. Come home.